First of all, introducing our challenger.
Out of the blue corner.
He's going to step in and he does. It's all over.
Let's bring on the boom.
This is Eternal MMA.
Mixed martial arts fans, this is Eternal Insiders, and this is yours truly, joined today by the double champ of the Eternal MMA commentary booth himself, Mr. MCT, Tanera Nathan. Looking good with the hood on, travelling back from Brisbane in the car. He's kind enough to join me today for the first time. A little bit long overdue, but we're here now, good to go. Tanera, thanks for joining me today, man. How are you?
Luke Trahair, I'm fantastic. I couldn't ask for a better introduction than that. I might have to steal some of those zingers for my opener this weekend. So thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Oh, man, I'm always learning from the best, mate. It's always you that I'm sort of taking the cues from, mate. So, you know, you're thanking yourself kind of in a bit of a roundabout way, I think.
Gosh. Hey, you take them all, man. I make them up on the spot. I know Cam and Ben would like me to put in a bit more preparation, but when it comes naturally, you just do what you're told. So
that can't be true.
You take all the lines you want, brother.
You're not making them up on the spot, are you? You surely your preparation game's strong, mate. Like, come on.
After 5 years, you'd want to think so. Yes, I think the last couple of years I've tried to put a bit more effort leading up to the show. But yes, I still need to work on my what I call creative prowess during the show, opening, during, and closing. But look, hey, we're in this together, and we're both improving. So thank you.
We're getting there slowly. I mean, you're a little bit more fast-tracked ahead of me, man. I mean, like, you know, I'm making a lot of shit up on the spot myself here too. So as I just mentioned before the show, sitting here free winging it with my nice and busted mic stand that I just had after finishing with David Martinez. Maybe the interview was so hot that it's just decided to kill itself. So we're sitting here, we're kicking it old style with the mic like this, but I mean, it's a little bit more free. I'm going to sort of sit back and just sort of chill a little bit. It's actually kind of nice.
It looks good. It looks good on you. I think you've got the tone down packed. Your stage presence is fantastic. I think me and Blake Richardson, we've got to be on our game this weekend because I tell you what, if we're not, you might have to step in. You never know.
I'm not holding any torches or anything to Blake Richardson, mate. The man's an absolute whiz inside that cage, man. I always, every time Blake's in that cage, man, I'm always talking about him. I can't believe like how on point he is with like every cue that he's got. Like I've never seen that man miss a beat. I mean, you'd be more familiar with him than me. I mean, you see him in work. He's a pro.
Yeah, he's incredible. And I think it's probably a good thing to start this podcast off with him because the intensity that he brings to his introductions, you know, obviously I've been with Eternal for 5 years and we've had I've commentated with several guys cage side and we've had a few announcers and I think that he really sets the tone and the stage or the cage. If we want to get technical for the fighters, not just with his introductions, but his cage presence, if you must, from start to finish, he's fantastic. So it's funny because I watch a lot of his clips on his comedy and the work he does outside of MMA, and I take a few tips and tricks from him and try to implement them while I'm commentating as well. So no, you got to give credit to the man when it's due.
He's so locked in, man. I mean, even everything. Like, I mean, I'm always obviously impressed by like how he is in the cage when he's talking to fighters and that sort of thing. I mean, he obviously gets to prep a little bit beforehand, but I mean, even when he's like talking to Cam to hype the show up at the start of the fight, and even the way like he just transitions everything, like he never gets stumped by anything. Like he's just straight into the next question. He's straight onto the next thing. Like I go through it, like I pretend sometimes like, all right, if this was me here and I'm getting thrown this, like how would I sort of come back? And I find myself sitting there watching the TV just going, like he's just like, he's so clicked in, man. Like like you said, like I watch all these clips and that sort of thing that he does on Instagram and his comedy and that sort of stuff. Like, I mean, you know him better than I do. Like, how long has he been doing this sort of stuff for? I mean, he's got his sort of fingers in every pie. He's incredible.
Yeah, I think so. I certainly think there's a future for Blake, whether it's as announcing or hosting. My first probably experience where I really learned that Blake was the real deal was when we hosted Eternal Playback. Even though I think I said this during the Anthony Drillich and Jamie Renoff fight, I was like, you know, me and him, we're not classified technically as fighters, but when it comes to the gift of the gab, you give us a topic and we can talk about it till the cows come home. So when we were doing Eternal Playback, breaking down the fights, fight analysis from his standpoint, I was like, man, you actually know your stuff, plus the presentation really makes him the total package. So no, if anything, he's definitely a guy to learn from, not just from a public speaking standpoint, but like you said, in preparation, to deliver on the spot. So he really is Johnny on the spot when it comes to opening a show, the introductions and closing. Yeah, no, he's the best.
Not a bad looking bloke either. I mean, he goes all right in the looks department. Does Blake?
I always tell him, I said, mate, you look fantastic. It's like looking in the mirror. You look so good every time I see him at the show. So no, you're absolutely right. He's the total package of that bloke.
He's a total package. I can take a few cues.
He's watching this.
What's that? You hope he's watching? Oh, you
I certainly hope he's watching this.
So you might have gone through a tunnel there. I sort of lost you there for 2 seconds, but you're back. It's okay. We're still rolling.
We're rolling, brother.
We're rolling. No, Blake, the full package, absolutely. I was going to say, like, you take a few cues. You haven't been to see the barber for a couple of weeks, as we touched on before we started talking here. So Blake's always looking trim. So, whoa, we're waved up here, brother. It's sitting up.
It is.
Look at it go.
You don't see these on Saturday night. You don't see the wavy locks come out.
We've normally got the nice slick back hair going. We're looking good, beards all like nice and good to go. We're looking. You getting something fixed up before this week, brother, or what's going on?
I'll get a lineup. I'll get a nice skin to zero.
Yeah.
To a half fade.
Nice.
And just around the moustache.
Do you normally go and see the same person, or you just kind of get in where you can kind of get in, or you're sort of like me and you got to go to the same guy every time?
I've been going to the same barber for 8 years.
Nice.
My man Adam at Ace of Fades and Surfers Paradise. 8 years. I think when I made my commentary debut for Boxing Mania, this was back in 2017, I think, 6 years ago. Adam picked me up. So,
yeah, nice.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to go see him on Thursday before the show.
Was it that kind of like discovery? Like, I mean, you maybe been seeing barbers for years and then like you just sort of locked on this one. You're like, oh God, you're the guy. You're the guy. I can't go and see anyone else. Like you wade through the weeds for like a few years and then finally you lock into that one guy and you can't bear to be with anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I had a barber. His name was Jager Majid. He was actually a fighter. We used to train at Prophecy Fight Center in Miami. 13 years ago, back in 2010. He actually fought on, I think it was Cam's first card as a promoter. Was called Days of Glory.
Yes,
and he was actually one of the mixed martial artists on that card, and he was cutting hair at the time. So I was seeing him for probably about 3 to 4 years. Then he moved back to New Zealand, and then I found Adam at Ace of Fades, and he's followed a similar style. So I just get what's called the Turkish fade. Even though I'm from New Zealand, I get confused from being from the Middle East, which is absolutely not a problem. A big salam alaikum to all our Middle Eastern viewers out there.
Yes, and I'm sure we got tons of them. We'll give the big shout out if anyone's in the everyone who's watching these shows from far and abroad. Make sure you let us know in the comments if you are from those parts. So big shout out to Tanera Nathan there for sure. And we are going to talk about a couple of things, including the upcoming card, man. But as I said to you, talking in messages there, I did want to quiz you a little bit about yourself. It's been a long time coming. You know, I've wanted to pick your brain about a few things, but I just want to know a little bit more about you, man, and maybe for the people that don't know about you in terms of how you sort of got into this game. Like, where did you first sort of start in terms of getting yourself, into sports commentary in general, sort of let alone from the MMA perspective?
I started in boxing. So in 2016, I went to my local PCYC and just started boxing again. I'd had a couple of corporate fights in 2010 when I was playing rugby just here on the Gold Coast for Bond University. And then it wasn't until I came back from a church mission in West Africa in 2013, played a bit of footy, went to uni, and then kind of decided I just needed a bit of a change. So I went and did a bit of boxing at the PCYC just here on the Gold Coast and had no idea what I was doing with my life. So I spoke to my coach and I said, look, do you guys have any, amateur boxing tournaments coming up just here at the gym? And he said, yeah, we got one next month in June. So this was back in 2016. I started at the gym. 2017, I got on the mic as an MC and announced my first amateur card. On the card was, I think, 107 fights. I think I changed the number every time, but it was certainly more than 100 fights. I think we started at something like 10 o'clock in the morning, didn't finish till 1 a.m. And I told my coach, I said, I'll do it for free. I just wanted to see if I had what it took to get on the mic and just announce fights. I didn't want to be Bruce Buffer. I didn't want to be Michael Buffer or Joe Rogan. I just wanted to see if this is something that I could have a passion for. And since that time, the feedback I got was quite positive from my coach, from the fighters that I announced from my gym and from other gyms as well. And then from that one experience, I actually got picked up by a promotion called Boxing Mania. That was run by Nick Midgley and Angelo Hyder. For those in the know, Angelo Hyder is the current coach of the Maloney brothers and also Danny Green's old boxing coach as well. So I did a show for him out at the Tweed Sports Club, and that show was aired on Fox Sports Australia. And I was actually in there as a colour commentator / fight analyst. So with an undefeated record of 2-0 in corporate boxing, they thought that was enough credibility to put me in the seat next to Peter Maniatis, who was in charge of play-by-play, Australian Boxing Hall of Famer. And what I found out is that Peter Maniatis usually commentates with guys like Danny Green, Jeff Fennick, maybe a boxer that's actually a fighter, but they decided to go with me for their promotion. So obviously there's just a little bit of a gap between Danny Green, Jeff Fennick, and myself. You know what I mean? Just a little bit of a gap. But that was my first show, my first experience with commentary. I did 5 shows for them. I did another show, an MMA show. My first experience was with Nitro MMA, and then with Daryl Martin. I wanted to bring in
shout out Daryl Martin
as well, because I tell you right now, if it wasn't for Daryl, who messaged Cam on the night while we were in the booth for Nitro, I wouldn't be commentating today.
Daryl Martin, as you've probably seen, been on the show. We've done a little bit of a fight card breakdown. We're going to do one for Eternal 77. So, yeah, big shout out to Daryl for sure.
So, watching the whole episode with you and Daryl, I was very emotional because it was about time since I'd seen his face. He'd gone missing for a while, but I was very happy to see him back and giving his opinions in not just for Eternal, but in MMA. So Daryl was actually the one, and people may not know this, that actually messaged Cam and said, "Hey, mate, listen, I may have a guy for you." And my first show was in May the 5th. Eternal 32, Mumford versus Joblin. And ironically, this weekend, it's the first time that Kieran Joblin has fought in Eternal since he fought Brenton Mumford back in 2018. So long story short, it was Daryl Martin that kicked off MCT's career. So thank you, Daryl.
Thank you to Daryl for spawning the career of one MCT. That's incredible, man. And we come full circle with Joblin fighting on the card this week too. So pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. And, doing a bit of study with this in relation to this card this week, I thought it was pretty special because I think I've done, if you bring in boxing and announcing and you even include a bit of footy, I think I've done 50 plus events, most of those with Eternal. But it's pretty special to see Kieran come back to Eternal against a guy like Dave, when, for me, my first introduction to Eternal MMA was back at Eternal 32 when Kieran fought Brenton. So I'm excited to see him back, yeah.
Sure. I mean, when you say 50 events, I mean, that doesn't sound like a lot, but I mean, I can't remember how long I've been sort of watching Eternal for. I mean, truth be told, it's only sort of been a couple of years when sort of Cam first sort of spoke to me, but it just seems like so many events you've been doing this for, man. Like when you quantify it like that and sort of say it out loud, it seems way more than 50. Like you just seem like you're a part of the furniture. Like, it's Tanera Nathan in the commentary booth, man. It seems like you've been around forever.
Well, it feels like that. I mean, it certainly feels like it's been more than 50. I think just with Eternal, the brand itself, when I see how far that Cam and Ben have taken this from Eternal 32 when I first started to just watching the promos or the trailers, and then you see like a UFC promo pop up as an ad during the show, it's kind of like, it's really surreal to think that, we are at the top of the bill when it comes to MMA here in Australia, and to think that, we were classified as just a local show not too long ago. Sure. I'm very grateful for my involvement, and I'm very grateful that Cam and Ben have decided to stick with me, because I tell you what, there's guys out there that I would dare say that are probably just as good, if not better than me on the mic. But when it comes to the passion that I have for the sport, even though I haven't competed, I've just got so much respect for the fighters, and I feel like there's a bit of a connection having followed guys that I've commentated over the years from Eternal 32 right up until now. I feel like I owe it to them to give of my best in the booth. So I am very grateful. I don't take it for granted. And I think that's why over the past few years I have decided to, put a bit more commitment and preparation into what goes on the night of the show. So, I appreciate your feedback, and I certainly hope that you enjoy the commentary that goes on. I always say this: if you got the volume up too loud listening to me, you'll go deaf. But whoever I'm with, whether it's Ben or Kyle or Brenton or Benny Ellaway, I've been with so many people. I am really grateful to really have the best seat in the house. And a lot of that comes down to Cam and Ben having the faith to stick with me over these years.
No, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing for me, man, that stands out about yourself. Like you just said there, it's just your passion. I mean, if you don't have that and you're sort of just doing it because you sort of think you're good at it, I mean, that kind of takes you so far. You see that in your face and you hear it in your voice, like every show. I mean, I don't think there's any shows that I've seen you where you're there and you're not just bringing that energy 100% every time. You see it in your face, like every time, man, you hear it in your voice. It's a really cool thing to see. And you being the color commentator, I mean, you lead the dance so well, like no matter who you're with. Like, is it like, how sort of different is it for you? Like, you know, when you might have like a guy that's coming in, like, you know, sometimes when you're working with Ben, who's finding out an hour before the show that he's the one in the commentary booth, and maybe you're doing it with a guy that's, you know, experienced, maybe you're doing it with a Kyle Noak or anything like that. Like, do you sort of have to prepare in any sort of different way depending on who you're with? Like, you know, if you've got like a guy like Kyle Noak, for example, who, you know, you can sort of let him talk about the fights and that sort of stuff. Does that differ heaps for you, like in terms of you having to be the one leading the dance?
It does. I think for me personally, I have my structures that I stick to. So obviously when you've done as many shows for Eternal and you're familiar with the production team and how things are run, I have my structures that I stick to. So from when the show starts, I give an open, we review the main card, we go into the prelims, and then I throw to Blake and the show starts. Pretty much from that point on, I do my level best to not say as little as possible, but let Kyle or Ben or whoever's in that qualified seat as the color commentator and breaking down the techniques of the fight. I want to hear from them because I learn from them, and I know the viewers at home want to hear from them because they're the most credible opinion to give their 2 cents worth $1 million, as I always say, on what is happening inside the cage. As far as the climatic events like a big knockout or a finish or a submission out of nowhere, that's when I can come in and add that excitement. So I think with myself and Kyle and even Ben, we've got a good thing going on. It's a bit of a verbal dance. But for me personally, if I've got a bit of structure and I know where I'm going, what I need to speak, what sponsors I need to plug, it's almost second nature now, especially when I'm working for Eternal, because the production team that we have make it so seamless and they make my job that much easier. But in my opinion, I know when I'm listening to the UFC, I love the excitement that a John Anik or my personal favorite, Mike Goldberg, brings to a knockout, to a submission, especially if it's something that like a come from behind win. I love that excitement, and I know the fans do as well. I'm getting excited just talking about it. But as I've come to appreciate the sport and even compete and train myself today, I have a added appreciation of, you know, obviously Joe Rogan's the greatest of all time, but I have an added appreciation for guys like Dominic Cruz, DC, Paul Felder, Michael Bisping, because of their experience. Sure. And I think that's where guys like Kyle and Ben, when they bring their experience to the commentary booth, it adds to that experience, and it's a weighted opinion that people can walk away and go, I didn't know that was the game plan he was following. I didn't know that that's what he needs to do when he's trying to work off his back from the bottom or off the cage. So I'm always learning from these guys, and I want to give them as much opportunity as I can to speak. But when it comes to that big climatic finish, yeah, I'll be there to bring it home.
No, and you do bring it home so well, man. I mean, I was watching a bit of tape on Ben Johnson before. I mean, obviously he's only had 2 fights, but I mean, he had that rear naked choke against Khan Sandy.
Yes.
The last one, and you're just like, rear naked choke, like, who saw that coming? I can't remember the exact words, but I mean, it was getting me amped, man. I'm like, I'm up for it. Like, incredible piece of commentary. I mean, that was a cool finish. I mean, that they must be cool for you when you get a finish that you sort of don't expect, like, and you just kind of get to cut loose.
Yeah, it's good. And I think what I've learned is that you can't just fly off the rails. You have to kind of, especially when, you know, I can't, because one thing with me, when I start losing my voice and going off the rails, I start speaking like this. You know what I mean? And if you look at all the greats that do it, whether it's a John Anik, Michael Goldberg, or even if you watch boxing, they maintain their composure, but they're able to add that excitement. But for that Ben Johnson submission, I was just like, man, no one was expecting that. So there are times where you have to just let it go and be yourself. But at the same time, keeping composure, I think, is the main thing. But, you know, in the sport, bro, sometimes you just can't help it.
Of course, man. I think you strike that balance really well, man. I mean, like you said, I mean, you bring that blend perfectly. You sort of let yourself go, but you said you keep it restrained, you know, you're keeping a handle on it. It's cool to watch. Like I said, I've taken a lot of pointers from you, and obviously we do a couple of different things, but enjoy watching guys like yourself, listen to guys like Blake and that sort of thing, do your thing. You know, it doesn't matter distinctive styles and that sort of thing. And you've got such a distinctive style yourself and the way you talk. Like, do you, like, in terms of when you first started doing this and sort of, you know, everything that you've learned up until this point and how you present yourself and how you talk, like, is it something that you actively practice? Like, is it something that you kind of had naturally from the beginning in terms of, I mean, you had to have that, right? You had to have a part about you that was just a natural entertainer and that sort of thing. But I mean, have you sort of specifically worked on anything like in terms of how you do offer that presentation?
I think it's come over time. In the beginning, if you go back and watch like shows from like Eternal 32, probably right up until I would say maybe like Eternal 60. I'll be honest with you, man, I wasn't happy with my work at all compared to what I enjoy about the commentary today. And I think that just comes from experience. I think in the beginning, I was more so just a fan who thought that it was cool to yell and scream over a mic. Whereas today, I think the biggest thing for me is actually training, understanding techniques, understanding game plans. I think going to the gym, getting to know the fighters for me has given me like a sense of belonging, because I feel like I know a bit more about the grappling, a bit more about stand-up. I don't know everything. And that's why I leave it to Cole and Ben or whoever I'm with in the booth to break that down. But I think the one thing that's really helped me is actually participating in the sport. Because as I have been able to learn different techniques, whether it's jiu-jitsu, wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, whatever it might be, as I'm watching the fight play out, I can see things that I didn't see before, which allows me to express it verbally. So that's the first thing that's helped. As far as public speaking, my mum probably saw the future. I know she didn't want me to use my public speaking skills in MMA because she hates violence, but she put me in effective communication classes while I was at school when I was 15. So I guess I don't want to call it a natural gift or a natural ability, because I believe that if you put in the work, anyone can do what I do, whether it's commentary or announcing. At the same time, I think that having that advantage of understanding effective communication in my teenage years has a massive effect on how I deliver myself in the commentary booth today. So a combination of having experience in my youth and combining that with experience in the booth for Eternal, as well as training on the mats and in the ring, I think it's coming full circle now. And over the past 5 years, I'm starting to feel that in the booth that I'm more comfortable, things come more naturally, and to be honest, I probably enjoy it more now than I ever have before.
I mean, you talked about being a fan of the sport, right? I mean, do you find for yourself, probably different for everybody, but do you find it sort of a little bit of a catch-22, being a fan of the sport, but also then working within the sport, talking about guys that, you know, you probably have personal relationships with, you know, guys that you sort of know very well, playing an impartial role like you are in terms of being a commentator, you know, cage side and that sort of thing, you know, talking to these sort of guys day in, day out, training with them, that sort of thing as well. Is it a bit of in any way, sort of a struggle for yourself, having to remove yourself as a fan, you know, from that sort of perspective, put that kind of hat on and then go in there and have that sort of impartial approach, you know, sort of to the fight game, you know, when these are guys that you sort of know so well?
Depends who's fighting. I think that there's always a bit of unconscious or conscious bias. I think that there was an experience when one of my good mates, I don't know if you know Sam Dobb, Dobby fought on I think it was Eternal 59 against Nick Kempu. It was his pro debut. He actually ended up losing that fight by split decision, but I was actually doing color commentary that night. And here's a dirty little secret. I'm actually a massive fan of Kempu as well. So, but Dobby's my teammate. You know, I absolutely love Dobby. I've been training with Sam for almost 5 years now. But I'm a massive fan of Nick, Uncle Des, Pasha, the team at Southside, and now the Fight Centre. Where in that fight, it's not that I was torn between the two, but to call a fight down the middle was a bit of a struggle. Because in that position where I'm breaking down techniques, offering fight analysis, I had to do my level best to not give an impartial view, because you know how, I guess, I don't want to say the word, but how toxic this industry can be and how harsh and critical they are on the commentary when you're just a little bit biased to the left or to the right.
Sure.
So the only struggle that I've really had was probably that fight between Sam and Nick, because I'm such a fan of both guys, but Dobby's my teammate, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get it.
As far as any other fights, I don't think so. I think in other podcasts that I've been on, or if you watch my Instagram posts and things like that, I think it's pretty obvious that I'm a fan of certain guys like Josh Kuhn, Justin Van Heeren, his last opponent, Rod Costa, Diego Pereira. I'm a fan of all these guys. So when they end up fighting each other, if I've had contact, or if I've been in contact with them that week, whether it's to get an inside scoop on how they're feeling leading into the fight, or what their predictions are, I do my level best to remove all of that and just call the fight as it is. But I think the only time I've had that struggle was when my teammate was fighting another guy that I respected a lot as well.
Sure. I mean, it's funny you mentioned that, because like long before I was doing the podcast, I mean, the first thing I was really doing, and technically still do, is like just like general article writing and stuff for Eternal MMA. I mean, up until that sort of point, pretty much just a fan of the sport, right? So, there's nothing, you turn on the TV on the Saturday, the Sunday, you watch the fights, you get to cheer or boo or whatever, and there's not really any sort of that emotional kind of connection to it. I think one of the things I struggled with sort of early on, and it was actually Nick Kep, who was actually the very first guy I ever talked to for Eternal MMA in terms of doing just like a little fight piece and that sort of thing, is when he fought Bricktop Jack James. Jack James, yeah. Sort of for that fight. Got to know the guys, did the article for him, never done anything like this sort of thing before, and then had to watch the fight sort of play out, guys that were talking about, what their hopes and dreams are for the future and all that sort of thing. And early on, that was sort of hard for me to deal with, was watching a guy like win great, but then a guy sort of suffer a loss. That was hard for me sort of in the beginning, and I feel like I'm sort of learning to deal with that sort of thing a little bit better as sort of time goes on. So I was just curious as to how, like, other people that have been around the game, like, how you sort of dealt with it. But I think when you've been doing it as long as you have, you start to appreciate the sport for what it is. Losses are part of the game, winning's part of the game. It's about sort of picking yourself up and sort of going forward from there. But it definitely can be challenging sometimes when you sort of know these guys and where they want to be and put themselves out there, and then sort of have it on the line, and have it sort of in a little way taken away from your night with sort of a loss.
Yeah, and I think to be as professional as possible, and that's a key element when it comes to, obviously my role is that when Cam sends out our notes for the week, there's always in big bold letters, commentary team to remain as unbiased as possible.
Of course.
And it can be hard. I mean, look what Ben said in his last conversation with you. When he's doing commentary, he may only find out like an hour before.
Yeah.
But his guys are fighting on the card.
Yeah,
and I
remember
commentating a card. Yeah. I remember commentating a card with Ben and Perth. It was just I think it was the undercard. I think he had to go and corner Jack Becker, who was actually headlining the card. But, I actually felt for him, because it must be very difficult, because you invest so much time as a coach into these guys, and then you got to go and commentate. How do you remain unbiased?
Yeah.
For him, it's a lot more difficult than someone like me, who doesn't necessarily have that relationship with so many guys who are fighting on a promotion that you essentially own. So for me, I can kind of remove myself from that situation. I think the most respectable thing to do in every situation is to be unbiased, to call it as I see it. It's a lot easier to call it as I see it as a play-by-play commentator, as opposed to offering fight analysis, because let's face it, I don't have as much knowledge as a Kyle Noak, Ben Vickers, or a Callan Potter, right? But in the play-by-play, I can call a finish for what it is, because you can see it, it's right in front of you. Whereas if I'm offering an opinion on game plan, or what this guy should do, or what they should do, there are differing views and opinions of that from the viewers at home. And I think that's where the criticism came from when I was offering colour for, I think it was Eternal 58 and 59. But more to your point, remaining professional in the booth for me is an absolute must. And I know, not to mention any names, but I've listened to commentary, I've heard commentary, and I've watched shows where you can just, who the commentators are rooting for. And from a brand perspective, you want to be seen as fair and as equitable as possible. And that's my job to do for Eternal, and to just call it as I see it, and to call it down the middle. So I think not perfect, but hopefully getting to a point where it's fun and it's educational for everyone to listen to while the fight's going on.
How does it sort of go in terms of the build up for you, like towards an event? Like, do you sort of feel kind of like nerves in sort of a lead up to an event, like a week sort of out or anything like that? Like on the day, like in terms of your preparation, that sort of thing, like do you have to kind of get yourself into a bit of a zone? Like any mantras you sort of put yourself through? Like what's that sort of build up like for you in terms of getting yourself pumped to put on the show that you do?
I do get nervous. It's more so a nervous excitement. I think that my preparation starts 2 weeks before the show. I'll get my openers ready, my closers ready for both the undercard and the prelims. We'll get a production sheet, maybe 3 or 4 days through the show, leading up to the show on Saturday. But anytime I feel like any sort of nerves or anxiety, I always think, just imagine if you were fighting. Would you rather that, or would you rather this?
It's a good way of putting it.
And I know exactly which one I would rather, because at the end of the day, again, I understand my role in the sport. I understand my role for the company. And those nerves of excitement come from a place of, I absolutely love what I do, and I just want to make sure I do the best for the promotion and for the fighters and for the viewers. But the fighters and the promotions obviously are a primary priority.
Of course, I mean, everyone benefits, man. We get the show back home, the fighters get to get the MCT, the big twist and that sort of thing that you like to chuck in. So it's cool to see from all angles, man. Of course, we roll in for Eternal 77 this week. What does that sort of week look like for you, like coming in now? Like, what do you sort of do between now and then? You mentioned you sort of get your job notes and that sort of thing sort of come through. Like, what do you do to get to sort of travel from home, like straight into the event? You rock up at a certain time. Like, what does the rest of the week look for you in terms of the lead up to this one?
I'll usually have everything done by the Thursday. I'll go to the library. I think if you saw my story on Instagram, I usually take my daughter to the library. I'll do some study.
Nice.
And she'll play some games on the computer. But yeah, I'll pretty much, anyone fighting on the night, I'll go back and watch. For example, Dave's last couple of fights on UFC Fight Pass, I'll go and find some footage on Kieran. Ben Johnston obviously fought an Eternal since day one, since he made his debut against Caleb Rideout.
Yep.
And then Emil Jerry's as well. I'll go and watch footage on both the main and the co-main event. And then anyone else that I see on that main card who I'm familiar with, I'll just gather as much information as I can. And then when the run sheet comes through from Cam and the production team, I'll incorporate that into my own notes to make just some sort of a smooth structure that I can follow throughout the night. And then Friday is the weigh-ins. I'll try and get to the weigh-ins. If Cam's kind enough to have me announce the weigh-ins, I promise I won't mess it up this weekend. I can announce the weigh-ins. And then Saturday, I will get there roughly around, say, 2:30, 3 o'clock before the doors open at 5, just to check in with the production team, sound check, all the rest. So, and I think the reason I get there early is I just want to be around it, feel the energy. If the fighters are there early, which most of them are, I like to attend the fighters meeting, check in with Pete Hickmon and the refs, and just, like you said, get in the zone from a commentating perspective. Because even though I'm not in there throwing hands, it's a different nervous energy to being a fighter. I've still got 8 hours of work ahead of me. So I don't want to make a mistake at all. I've made plenty of mistakes. Some you may have noticed, some you may not have. But my goal essentially is to have the perfect show. It hasn't happened yet. It might not happen for a while. But I feel like if I get there early with the preparation I've done during the week, I'm giving myself the best chance to perform on the night, whether it's with Ben, whether it's with Kyle or whoever. I'm giving myself the best chance to give them my best in the commentary booth for the viewers and the fighters inside the cage. So, yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of work that goes into it. Not too much, but just a little bit.
I mean, just a little bit, man. Like you said, like you got like 6 or 7 hours worth of work that you got to do. I mean, the preparation beforehand, doing the actual show and everything, like leading through that, and then obviously wrapping the show up and all the notes you got to go through, all the promos that you got to sort of spit out. I mean, it's not like you just sort of turning up for work for the day and then you just kind of chill out and sort of let the day sort of happen to you. I mean, it's a pretty full on thing that you do, man. It's impressive as hell to watch. I mean, you've got to, as you said, you've got to sort of be on point. There's that constant sort of chase of perfection. Doesn't matter if you don't hit the nail on the head like absolutely every time because you're just constantly chasing that. And I think you do that just as good as anyone, man. I mean, I'm in no position to be able to, qualify that as far as like what it's good. But I mean, from this end, man, like it looks incredible. It's very impressive to watch. I love seeing you there every time. I mean, you obviously don't get to commentate every event. I think, do you pretty much just exclusively do like what's kind of on the Gold Coast? Do you ever make it over to any of those events, like over the other side of the country? I understand you work like outside of Eternal, that sort of thing, so maybe it's not, logistically viable for you. But like, have you done events like in other places outside of like the Gold Coast that maybe I haven't seen?
For Eternal specifically?
For Eternal, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, well, I've been to Perth twice. I think with me specifically, I'll be at every Gold Coast show that Cam and Ben want me to. I think since 2021, Cam and Ben have made it clear that they want to be exclusively for the Gold Coast show. So I'll be at every single one, regardless if I'm working or not. I mean, I don't know how many times I've called in sick to work to commentate here on the Gold Coast. So it's that's a must for me. When Ben and Cam need me in Perth for whatever reason, I'll be there. But to be honest, I think Brett Benetti and who's the other bro that commentated with him?
God, you put me on the spot now. Like
I forget his name. Yeah, I forget his name.
He's got a name. I know that.
Yeah, no, he does.
I can't remember, but they did a good job. Yeah, they did a good job.
Yeah, they do a good job. So I think Brett and the Cuzzy bro, will call them. They do a fantastic job in Perth. And look, if Cam and Ben need me in Perth, I certainly hope they need me in Sydney this September, because I'll be there regardless.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm totally open to doing every show that Eternal needs me. But definitely the Gold Coast shows, and hopefully, definitely, I'll be in Sydney.
I definitely
at September.
I do want to talk to you about Sydney in September, because that's our UFC 293 as well as the Eternal card. So I do want to get your thoughts on that before it's all said and done for today. But of course, Eternal 77 coming up. David Martinez back in the main event against Kieran Joblin, a man that we talked about before. You said yourself, you'd like to sort of put in the work, do a bit of studying, those sort of things. These would be two guys that you'd be very familiar with anyway. But when you sort of look at this fight, like, what do you sort of see here? Obviously, David coming off his recent loss to Blake Donnelly for that title. David's a former two-time Eternal MMA champion in his own right, looking to go back and eventually get that belt for a third time. Kieran Joblin's like 37 pro fights, I think, that Kieran's had. Just an incredible wealth of experience. I mean, David himself, like 15 fights I think he's had, but I mean, 37 pro fights just sounds incredible. Making his debut, I think, for Eternal MMA is Kieran Joblin. I think we said it's the first time he's been on Eternal. I could be getting that wrong, but it's his second time for Eternal MMA, sure. And there's a long list. I'm going down Tapology, looking at all these fights, and I'm trying to look through 37 fights to get through. So, but like when you sort of look at that, those two guys up against each other, like that's a fight to look forward to, I'm assuming, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason Cam and Ben put it at the top of the bill as the main event, because when you look at Dave, I mean, I think he's the only mixed martial artist in Eternal history to become a two-time champion. I know Rod was going for the double champ status in Perth. He would have made history had he beaten Justin. But I think Dave is the only guy to hold that lightweight title on two separate occasions. So anytime you have a championship fighter or even a former champion fighting as the main event, and especially with Dave being from Queensland, he'll have a huge following at the Southport Sharks. It's going to draw a lot of eyes. When you look at Kieran, it'll be his second appearance, like I said, since he debuted on Eternal back at Eternal 32 in May of 2018 against Brenton Mumford. And when you look at where these guys are at in their career, they've got mixed records. And I love what Daryl Martin said in his interview with you, when he said these guys, they want to hold on to that undefeated record. He said, go out there and get some belts. Well, Dave's done that, and Kieran will be looking to do that. I think he's held belts in other promotions. But when you look at the weight that an Eternal Championship strap holds, and it essentially can punch your ticket to the UFC, I'm assuming both of these guys want to fight in the UFC. So what better way to make a statement than in a non-title fight, which could set you up for a title fight in the near future? For Dave, he'll be going for his third bite at the cherry. For Kieran, if the lightweight championship opportunity comes along, should he beat Dave, I'm sure he'd jump at the opportunity. So there's high stakes for both guys. And I think in their careers at this stage, it's not necessarily about being undefeated. It's practically, I mean, it is impossible right now, but it's more so who they beat. So if Dave can go out there and get a decisive win over Kieran, or if Kieran can get a flawless victory over Dave, it'll work wonders for them in the future. It'll give them the power to demand, whether it be a title shot or a number one contender spot, and then rack up a few wins. And there you have it. If you can get 4 wins plus an Eternal belt on the road to the UFC, I mean, that really sets yourself up for big things in the future. So, to be honest, I don't necessarily know who's going to win this fight. I'm not bold enough to make a prediction. But what I do know is that the fans are going to be treated to a real spectacle, because stylistically, if you listen to what former MC of Eternal MMA, Daniel Maudsley, said, it's a grappler versus striker. But both guys are very well versed in all departments. And just doing my research, the experience that Kieran brings to the cage, you can't buy that even though Dave has, I think he's had, 16 fights? He's 16 fights
15 or 16,
deep into his career.
Yep.
Yeah. At times he's held that eternal lightweight strap. He's got championship experience. So when you look at both of these guys in their careers at this stage, they really are in their prime. So this is a must-win for both guys, and I'm very excited to see the outcome of this main event, because you could be looking at a title run for either of them.
I mean, just on that too, I mean, the lightweight division, I mean, everywhere, but I mean, especially in Australia, is just like absolutely on fire. Talking to Dave Martinez earlier, just before speaking to you, and just said it's absolute shark-infested waters in the lightweight division. I mean, like we said, he's a two-time champ, and then, I mean, obviously, we had Blake Donnelly, snatched that from him, Blake beating David that he has twice, and then him getting that snatched off him by Quillan Solkield, a guy that came in with a 3-1 record. I mean, there's just lightweights coming out the wazoo here in Australia. It's cool to see. Obviously, we've got Tom Nolan going over and doing his thing in the contender series and that sort of thing too. But I mean, the lightweights are queuing up, man. I mean, you've been around the traps, you've seen everything. Like the lightweights here in Australia, like they're really starting to come to the forefront. Getting that win, like you said, in this fight, absolutely crucial. For both guys to sort of look good too, because there's just so many guys coming through that are going to want to bite at that cherry. Quillan Solkield, he said himself, big old target on his back, and he loves it. I mean, the guy's a 4-1 fighter and he's already a champion, but he's going to have guys like just absolutely coming at him now. So it's just, it's a cool thing to see for the lightweight division in Australia.
Yeah, it's incredible. That Eternal Lightweight Championship belt, it's a hot potato, man. I mean, if you can hold it for longer than one fight, you're doing pretty well. So with Quillan's last performance over Blake, I know he was fighting in his hometown, but if you look at the general consensus, Blake's performance over Dave and how Dave didn't come out in the third round, you would have to think that going into that fight with Quillan, Blake would have been very confident. And then for Solkield to go in there and just finish him in round one was just an absolute shock. Incredible. So congratulations to Quillan. I think when you look at the amount of guys that are in that division, the young fellas that are coming up, and the stalwarts that have been there for a long time coming into their prime, or a few of them, I don't want to say they're on the downslide, but are going to do everything they can to get back in the win column. It's an absolute dogfight at the top. I mean, from the champion right down to whoever's ranked number 10, depending on how much you trust those Tapology rankings, from 1 to 10. Any of those guys could challenge for an eternal lightweight strap based on their skill level and experience. So it's incredible. It's an incredibly exciting time to be a lightweight. At the same time, not something that I'd be interested in. So I get the pleasure of seeing these guys put it all on the line inside the cage in Australia's toughest weight class.
No, and I mean, you go back not sort of too long ago, and I mean, we had even guys that haven't come back from injury yet, like Jack Becker. I mean, some of those guys have been at the top of the division. Like you said, it's been a bit of a revolving door in terms of the champions sort of coming through, such as just the level of sort of these guys that are coming through now and snatching this belt. You could almost see, and I mean, May Quillan's reign, lasts as long as it can for him and all that sort of thing. But I mean, you could just see the belt. Like, maybe he defends it a few times, but I mean, just the guys that are coming through, like maybe it becomes more of a revolving door, because that's sort of where we're heading, and that rising tide is just coming up. It's really cool to see. The lightweight division's absolutely on fire. I mean, this card for Eternal 77, we've only got a couple of pro fights at the top of the bill. We had Ben Johnson, I should say, coming out for his third pro fight. He's going in against Emil Jerry's. Ben Johnston, obviously a former two-time Muay Thai champion. Speaking of him today, he's well and truly hanging out the gloves, does not want to go back, gloves in terms of the Muay Thai gloves, does not want to go back to kickboxing, wants to definitely do this MMA thing. He's keen to go for this fight against Emil Jerry's. Be very cool to see if he can continue that momentum, especially after that rear naked choke win that he got out of nowhere last time he came out.
Yeah, no, I love watching Ben fight. I think that there was a lot of expectation on Ben in his first fight against Crazy Horse a couple of years ago, when he made his debut at Eternal, and rightly so. If you look at all that he's achieved across combat sports, specifically in Muay Thai, transitioning those skills inside the cage, we all expected big things from him. When he fought Khan Sandy, the way that he weathered the storm in the first round and then managed to just completely control Khan on the ground to get a submission, I think we were all very shocked, but at the same time, not surprised at how well he's progressed. If you look at the team he's been training with, I know he owns his own gym. trains with guys like Nick Kepu, Diego Pereira, Cass Haberfield, and the team at the Fight Center. But there's another guy out there by the name of the Stylebender. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Just that guy. Someone across the pond there somewhere, yeah.
Might be some sort of a UFC middleweight champion.
Some kind of up-and-comer.
He was his chief sparring partner when Israel was preparing for Alex Pereira.
Yep.
And you saw the embrace that they had backstage at UFC 288. And the meaningful embrace and the gratitude that Israel expressed to Ben when he says, "You were the best Powhatan that anyone could ever ask for."
High praise.
The highest of high praise from the best fighter on the planet, in my opinion. So the expectation is still there from Ben. And I think that this weekend, you're going to see a new and improved Ben Johnson. You got to give credit to Emil Jerry's for even taking this fight. I think he's 1-0. I think he got a win against Samad back, I think it was either early this year or last year. But I think it's his first appearance on Eternal. If you look at his fighting style, high pressure, very aggressive, quite a qualified wrestler, I would say, and managed to control Samad in his last fight. But at the same time, it's a tough ask when you're looking at a guy like Ben Johnson, especially with the team that he's got behind him. We know anything can happen in this sport. Again, not going to make a prediction to remain unbiased. However, I think the general consensus is that Ben is well and truly prepared for this fight. But at the same time, don't write Emil off. With those 4-ounce gloves being the great equalizer, anything can happen inside that cage. So I think Cam and Ben have put together a perfect co-main event to raise the curtain for Dave and Kieran at Eternal 77 this Saturday.
No, I mean, it's a cool card. Like I said, it's only sort of a few pro fights that we got there. But I mean, even sort of looking down the list and a lot of the amateur fighters, I'm sort of vaguely at least familiar with and that sort of thing too. So it could be a bit of a sleeper. I mean, you say that about any Eternal card. I don't think there's any Eternal card we've had in recent memory, be it it's two fights at the top of the bill that have got championship belts on the line, or whether it's not. Like every fight from like start to beginning, it's just absolute crackers of a fight. And I think that speaks to the Eternal MMA matchmaking as well. And I've got no doubt they've hit the nail on the head right across the board with this one too. But is there sort of anything else that stands out for you for the rest of this card? I did speak to Don Maher today. He's going in there for his third pro fight against Jordan Thomas in before that Ben Johnston fight. Don Maher he's done it a few times in the amateur ranks for Eternal MMA as well. So I think there's a lot of people looking forward to seeing Don Maher back in the Eternal MMA cage in his own right as well.
Yeah, and I think with him being the first fight on the card, he like Dave will have a big following as well. With the fight being here in Queensland, I know he's still training out of Compton Training Centre. Is that correct?
Yes, he is.
Yep. So being under Stephen Elliott, he's improved strength to strength as each fight has progressed. I know he got a bit unlucky against Quillen back in Perth, I think it was last year. But no, he'll be looking to make a statement against Jordan Thomas. Jordan, he's experienced as well. I don't think he's lost a fight. So, he's fought top guys from around the world as well. It's, again, the lightweight division, there's really no gaps from 1 to 10. And even if you look at 10 to 15, they're the next wave coming through to challenge those top contenders. So I think that's a good way to open the card. And then to finish with the co-main and the main event, those in attendance, and if you're watching at home on UFC Fight Pass, you don't want to miss this one. You talk about the undercard being a sleeper. Well, you just have to look at the last card we had here on the Gold Coast at Eternal. So I think it was Eternal 75. That was the best prelim card I think I've ever had the privilege to be cage side for.
Yep.
The ones that went to decision, it was back and forth right from the get go, and right up until I think we went to UFC Fight Pass. I know Ben said this. He said that was the best prelim card I've ever seen, and then we started the main card with my guy.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, I don't want to say it was lackluster, but we all know how good Anthony Drillich was. He managed to scrape a win over Jamie Renoff there.
Yes.
But that just goes to show how good, how highly competitive these matchups are at the amateur level. And I think you'll see the same in our prelim card on Saturday.
No, always a lot to look forward to with the prelim, guys. I think, what you just said there, the prelim fights for that card, were just absolutely incredible. But I think as long as I've been watching this, I've been blown away by almost every prelim card that I've watched for Eternal MMA. I've said this a couple of times on the show. The only show that I've been to for Eternal live in event was the Perth event before the UFC in February this year. And like everyone that sort of turned up for those fights, like even from the first bell for the first fight was incredible. And the fights were mad as well. I took my best mate over there. He had an absolute blast. And I said, look, these are just the amateur guys. Like, wait till we even get to the pro guys. You notice the level sort of kick it up a little bit when it gets there too. But I mean, these guys are coming out at each other like hard, like, you know, even from that sort of that lower level sort of standpoint. So a lot of cool things to look forward to. I'm psyched for this card. I'm never not psyched for an Eternal card. So absolutely can't wait for Eternal 77. You did mention before as well that you want to be on that card for Sydney when Eternal rolls around for Sydney as well. Were you planning on going to the UFC as well as trying to commentate for the Sydney card, or are you just sort of going to be sort of in town and just hoping to be commentating?
I will be in Sydney regardless. I think that when I watched from a distance, because I didn't end up going to Perth for Volk and Islam to commentate that one. I think Daniel Maudsley and Kyle Note did a fantastic job on that card. But I've let Cam know that I will be in town in Sydney regardless. So if it's going down on Eternal at the UFC, put me in, coach. As I always say, I'll be ready to deliver in Sydney. And I think that when you look at the way that Eternal can put together a show in line or in association with a UFC weekend here in Australia, the whole country gets behind it, man. And you see that in the fights, and you talk about the matchmaking for these amateur fights and how they're such good contests. Yes, it's the matchmaking, but it's also the level of amateur MMA. Amateur MMA it isn't what it was 5 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago, there wasn't really even an amateur division in mixed martial arts. So a lot of these amateurs, they're in the room with pros. I mean, if you look at that last prelim card, a lot of those guys, not only do they look like pros, they fought like professionals as well. So the gap between the amateur level and the professional level, it's still there, but it's getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. The only difference is experience. Ben Vickers always said this. Ben always says, your amateur career is your traineeship in preparation to become a professional. And I love that, because if you treat being an amateur as the stepping stone to becoming a pro, and being a pro to becoming a champion, fighting in the UFC, whatever your goals are as a fighter, then you're going to get the performances that you see on the undercard, because they're going to treat it like it's a pro fight. And I've seen that. I've seen that from the get-go. You're seeing it more because the level of competition is far higher than what it was 5 years ago, and that's because we've got more guys transitioning from other sports to MMA. They're finding a love for combat sports, and I tell you what, so am I. So I think with that Sydney card, Ben and Cam will be looking to put a big main card together, but also look forward to an incredible undercard that will deliver nothing short of fireworks as well. So a big weekend in Sydney in September. I think it's September 9th and 10th.
You would be correct. Be there. Before I let you go, man, I mean, on that card, is there anyone you'd like to see on that card? I mean, it's sort of a few names get kind of thrown around. I know Justin Van Heerden said that if he's not on the UFC for that weekend, we know what Justin Van Heerden's like. He'd love to get himself on that card. You know, maybe we have a couple of title fights teed up. I think Quillen Soulkilled said he'd love to be there to defend his lightweight belt. I mean, you could really load this card up to be something special with like a lot of cool fighters out there. We were even talking Matt Myers a little bit earlier. He's looking like he's struggling to get himself an opponent there. We want to see Matt Myers back in the cage. Maybe we see him in Sydney. There's some really cool potential matchups that we could potentially get for that card.
I dare say Cam and Ben will be looking to put a title fight together. I know for the UFC Perth, when it was Volk and Makhachev, when they did Eternal 72 at the beginning of this year?
Sure.
Prior to
that is not my strength, is remembering numbered cards or dates. I'll listen to Hawani sometimes, like, oh yeah, UFC like 101 back in July. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. Even you said something before where you riffed off a card like, you know, back Eternal 30, whatever, on what date, and I'm like, I can't do that. Like I struggle to remember what the card coming up is and what the card coming before you. So I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I think it might have been Eternal 72, but it was the Eternal before Volk and Islam. I know originally the plan was to have Costa and Van Heerden.
Yep.
And then they had Costa, Kakemba, and then the main event fell apart altogether. But they did have Stephen Ursig headline that card. So I dare say for Sydney, they'd be looking to have a title as the main event, possibly a double a double championship as the co-main and the main event would probably be ideal. I know, looking at Instagram, Matt Myers is keen to fight anyone and everyone. He's dropped a few names on his Instagram.
That he has.
Don't know what the story is there, but I would love to see Matt Myers on that card defend his middleweight championship. And I think, look, me and you both know, and so do the fighters, there's going to be a lot of eyes watching not just the UFC, but MMA in general, especially the night before the UFC. When Eternal goes ahead that night, they're going to sell out that stadium or arena, wherever it is, and there's going to be a lot of excitement surrounding Eternal that week. In line with the UFC. So if you're an amateur, if you're a pro, man, I mean, I know Cam's phone is probably blowing up now. Yeah, I want to fight on Sydney. Every man and his dog wants to fight in Sydney that weekend. But I think, and this is not to speak for Cam and Ben, but I think going down that same route that they attempted to go down in Perth when it was Volkan Islam at, I think, UFC 280, you probably want to have a couple of titles on the line in Sydney for that Eternal card prior to the UFC.
No, either way, I mean, it's going to be a really cool weekend for mixed martial arts. I mean, like we said, like the one they did for Perth and everything, like going into the UFC the next day. I mean, that was just 24 hours of back-to-back mixed martial arts, getting an absolute feed there. I was at both events. It was really cool. Would love to be at this one coming up. Not going to this one, unfortunately, but I mean, to be able to watch it from afar and see it on TV, hopefully seeing yourself there for that event as well, getting in the commentary booth, that'd be very cool. So, Cam, it's my decision. I want Tanera on that card, so Tanera's going to be commentating. You heard it here first. Can't take it back. It's on the internet. The internet's written in pen, so we can't undo it, unfortunately. It's going to be him there, so... Man,
you're too good to me, brother.
Oh, mate, it's, I do what I can, okay? I can pull some strings, definitely. I think I've been around long enough that I can start doing that, so...
Please do. Please do.
No, man, it's been a pleasure to have you here, man. Like I said, it's been a long time coming. Been looking forward to talking to you for a while. It's cool to chat to you for the first time, and... absolutely looking forward to picking your brains again in the future. Get you back on the show, and looking forward to seeing you back in that commentary booth there, man, because it's always an absolute treat watching you do your thing.
No, thank you so much, man. And I think that the feedback you've given me has melted my heart, to say the least. You know, I'm almost crying, put it that way.
You can cry here.
But no, it's a safe space.
It's a safe space.
But no, I appreciate you, bro. And right back at you. I appreciate your work. You know, every article that you put out, I make sure that I read, because it's good homework for me. And I think, since you've been hosting the Eternal Insiders podcast, it's not only just for me, but the viewers, the fighters, the fans. I think if I can throw some positive feedback right back at you and a bit of praise, I appreciate your work as well. And, I know Cam and Ben appreciate it, because I know with every single... The last thing the world needs is another MMA podcast, but the only thing the world needs is an Eternal MMA Insiders podcast. So if that's not a plug for you, I don't know what is. But thank you for all you do, bro, because for me personally, I learn a lot from you as well. So thank you.
Hell of a plug there for me, brother. Absolutely appreciate it. Very kind words. Always like learning from the best in Tanera Nathan. So thank you very much, man. Like I said, looking forward to having you back here. All the best for Eternal 77 this week. I know you absolutely put on a show like you always do. So thanks again, my man, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, brother. Yep, let's do it again. And I'll see you Saturday, live and exclusive on UFC Fight Pass.
Let's go, baby. Let's go.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.